And in a nation which is as vast and complex as India, technology is no longer just a tool. It's becoming a voice, a mirror, and sometimes a question mark. How do we navigate this new digital terrain while balancing ethics, creativity, and democracy? To help us decode the crucial intersection between intelligence, both human and artificial, we have with us Barsali Bhattacharya, a journalist, a researcher, and one of the India's most insightful voices on emerging technology. I request Barsali Bhattacharya ji, please come on the stage. She's been a journalist turned into an economic and author. She has over 14 years of experience in research and writing about economics, business, consumers, and everything lies in between. The interlocutor for the session, none other than Anupreeta Das, a journalist and an author currently working as a South Asia correspondent for the New York Times. I would request you to please join us on the stage. She was here with us yesterday and spoke about the Bill Gates session. Ladies, the stage is all yours. I'll be giving a close watch on the watch. Thank you very much. Rocket.
I think it's going to be hard to match that performance, but we will try. I just wanted to get started right away because, sorry. Oh, okay, sorry about that. I wanted to get started very quickly about AI and Barsali's book, which is very thoughtful and very clear. It's called Enter Prompt, Navigating AI in the World's Largest Democracy, and it is co-authored by Barsali and Siddharth Srikumar. So this book actually does answer a lot of questions, any questions that people might have about AI in the context of India and its future. And I think I learned a lot, definitely, and she has a very engaging and, as I said, very clear-eyed view of where things are going and the human impact of AI on India, on its people, on its society, on its economy. So without further ado, I wanted to ask Barsali a bunch of questions, but I thought I would start with, you know, if AI is a net positive for India in the field of employment. And I start with that because, I mean, you've seen you know, an economy that has grown very rapidly, but hasn't produced enough jobs, right? It's been kind of a jobless growth. And now we're talking about a technology that is coming in and taking away and beginning to take away some of the clerical and entry-level white-collar jobs that I think are very important for a young workforce that is trying to find its way into you know, toward upward mobility. And it is a very large group of people. And I'm curious if you think that this is a huge risk in terms of the way AI would take away those jobs, or if this turns into a net positive for India.
I think the answer to that question, whether AI will be a net positive for jobs, depends not on AI, but on everything else that the country does, so on our economy, on our policy, on the market conditions. What I mean by that is, and I think yesterday we were talking about unemployment being a huge problem in India, especially youth unemployment among educated young people. That is the foundation on which AI is coming, and I think that's a really big risk. If you look at jobs in India today, and you mentioned sort of the IT jobs, which are often a stepping stone, or knowledge jobs, office jobs, which is a way for social mobility in India. If you look at those jobs, they still form a very small share. So the share of the country's population that hold those jobs today is still very, very small. And we have a huge number of young people who are unable to get into these jobs. And that's, I think, a problem that needs to be solved, AI or no AI, because the services sector, the knowledge sector, cannot possibly have enough jobs to hire all of young college-educated Indians. And we need to find other opportunities for jobs. So I think that's probably the first thing we need to factor in when thinking about how AI is going to affect jobs. The second is a lot of the entry-level jobs in the market, say of an assistant in an office or a data entry person, customer service person, ITO, BPO jobs, call center jobs. These jobs have been going away even before the AI craze started. There have been less and less of these jobs. In fact, one thing that we are seeing of late as AI picks up is that there are more entry-level jobs where human workers are training AI. And I see a lot of those jobs coming to India and the global south, where there are a lot of young people who are looking for work opportunities and not enough jobs. So they are going to pick up jobs like this. So we are using humans to train AI.
Although which is scary because they're basically training themselves out of a job. But in the short term, I guess it's very important.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think the sort of real risk for AI in jobs is the creme de la creme of jobs in India, sort of consultancy, lawyers, tech, and those really fat salary jobs. There's going to be less of those. And I think that depends on market conditions rather than AI itself. So the basis of what AI does is if you needed 10 people to do one project today, if you're going to use AI, you're probably going to need 5 people. But does that mean companies are going to lay off the remaining 5 people? Not necessarily. It depends on the demand for the services they're offering. If the economy is doing well, there's going to be a lot more demand, and we're going to see that company pick up more projects, which will allow these extra 5 employees to work. But if we are in an economic downturn, that's not going to happen. So a lot depends on what conditions we are operating in. And I guess the final thing is, there's a lot of thinking around, sure, if AI is going to do the basic stuff, like writing or basic calculation, coding, again, a big source of employment in India, then what is it that we employers would look for in human workers, in human employees? And a few things that stand out are essentially soft skills, right? Communication. How do you deal with people? How can you influence or lead people? AI can create a beautiful presentation to go present to a client, but you would still need a human being to convince that client to sign up and work with you. You'd need a human being to shake their hands. So those critical thinking skills, problem-solving skills, communication skills become a lot more important. And I guess the question is, are our educational institutions preparing students well enough for that? Sure, the top schools and colleges and universities are, but what about the rest of the country? We already have an employment problem if we are not equipping the rest of the country with these essential skills. That's going to not definitely be a positive.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I do want to touch on the question of education, but before that, I'm always curious about the Indian bureaucracy, and I wonder if you've thought about how efficiencies can be generated, which would reduce the bureaucratic, the number of steps that it might take, the ease of doing business, or just, kind of an inflated Indian administrative service. But I was curious if you've ever kind of given thought to AI and the efficiencies that might be produced in government sector jobs.
One of the chapters we have in this book, and the chapters here are essentially framed as questions, because I don't think anyone has the answer with AI. It's a fast developing but very nascent technology, and if someone's telling you they have all the answers, they're probably bluffing you. So one of the chapters we have here is, will AI give us better governance? And we go into the kind of efficiencies that can be had there. Of course, if companies are using AI to bring more efficiency to their processes, obviously there's similar benefits to be had in the government, where a lot of work, a lot of time is spent in documenting information, processing it, analyzing it, and AI can do wonders for that sort of thing. one approach that comes up is we tend to use technology to deal with typically human problems like human errors, corruption, and one area in which the government has, different governments around the country, state and national, have been looking into using AI is in offering, social benefits. So there was an example in one particular state government where they were using an AI algorithm-based application to figure out which people were eligible for social benefits, which from the sound of it sounds like an amazing use case, right? You are ensuring there's no corruption, there's less chance of human errors, delays, etc. But there was an interesting case that came up in the news of this woman who was below the poverty line and therefore eligible to get this benefit, but her name was struck off the list because the system identified her late husband as being, as owning a car. And that was obviously wrong. It was a situation where the algorithms that were creating this list had confused her late husband who had the same name as some other person, right? Sounds like a very simple machine error, and it can happen. The problem, and it took this woman a lot of time to find a solution to it. The problem is, if we are thinking of technology as the solution to human corruption, human errors, then we are likely to have a lot less barriers and guardrails and checks and balances when the machine makes an error. And I think that's really, really important. Where would people go if a similar thing happens? Your names gets taken off the voter list or some other list because the algorithm thought you are dead or no longer living in that constituency. We need to have enough checks and balances. And I think that's the real catch, where it can bring in a lot of efficiency for governments, but the governments also need to have checks and balances. And most importantly, they need to be transparent about how they're using it.
Right. You mentioned, I mean, kind of the way AI algorithms work, and this is something that has obviously come up multiple times, and Barsali takes it up in her book too, just the gendered nature of AI and the fact that there are male biases that emerge in the way the way you have coding, the way you have the way you scrape for information on the internet using large language models, right? Like if you're using a lot of data, say one of the things you mention is Reddit, which does have a reputation for being fertile ground for misogyny, racism, sexism. There's a lot of commentary of that sort, but it's also a big source of content, for AIs to process information and deliver it. And so I'm curious to hear about what the fixes might be, or how big the scale of the problem is based on your research, and what the fixes might be, short-term and long-term.
So technology being biased is not new to AI. Technology has forever been biased. Voice recognition technology, for example, for the longest time wouldn't work when a woman was giving the command because it wasn't trained. The data that it was trained on didn't have enough diverse samples. It had a lot more male voices than women voices, and of course there's a difference in pitch, and so on and so forth. Another factor is the people creating these applications. So you do not, if you have a lot more men creating these applications, then you're probably not thinking about some of the problems, or you're not thinking from the female perspective. So AI, like every other technology, is biased. I think there was this really interesting, and it is biased, and sometimes it is worse than reality. There was this really interesting research in the US that I think Bloomberg did, and we talk about a lot of these examples in the book, where they asked an image creation model, an AI model that created images, to give it to produce images of US judges in the US. And the output was predominantly male and white. And they correlated that with government data on the actual number of judges employed in the US And the share of women in reality was much, much higher than what the output this model produced. So because, as you mentioned, Reddit, these models are being trained on whatever's available freely on the internet, social media being a primary source of information, and Reddit, which is, for anyone who doesn't know, it's a social media platform where you essentially have conversations, ask questions, and it is full of some really problematic, abusive, toxic material. So if you're training your models on it, in all likelihood, the output is going to be worse than reality. And I think it's really important for us to be aware of it and to talk about this. And I think that's the fix. We need to be holding the models, the companies creating these models accountable. We need to be thinking and talking about it so that the applications we get, which are going to be using these models, are being mindful of this bias. Because what we are seeing is a lot of, say, ChatGPT or Gemini, this is not the end of the road, right? The idea is that all the applications we use today, they are going to have AI built into them. So if AI is going to be the new assistant, we wouldn't need human secretaries and assistants, and we will all have a personal AI assistant, is what I read in the news quite often. And that makes me wonder, if there is a lot of inbuilt bias in the systems, what kind of suggestions or advice am I going to be getting from my AI assistant? Is it going to be suggesting things that it feels that an Indian woman of my age should be doing? And that could be problematic, especially for a younger generation. And we are, I think we're at a point of time where it's interesting, because when we wrote this, when we were researching for this book a couple of years back, we were reading a lot about how young people, teenagers, school, college students in the West were engaging in conversations with AI, very personal conversations. Many of them were having relationships with AI. And I think that's one thing we got really right in the book, where we thought this would be a big problem for India, and that's not a good thing in general, but it is today a big problem. When I speak to young people, I hear a lot of them say things like, it is easier to talk to AI than to talk to my parents or to my friends or boyfriends, because there's no judgment, right? It's always available. And it is exclusively for me. So imagine this. You have something at your service that is going to give all its attention to you. It's going to agree with everything you say. We know about how AI models are this level of psychophancy, right? They're going to agree with everything you say. They are also going to say things and give you suggestions. There are people asking for life suggestions. There's a lot of news about people having personal conversations with these models and being encouraged to take their own life or to go murder someone, right? We are seeing the sort of dystopian version of it, and I think it's, that's an extreme version, but even for everyday lives, we wouldn't want a young person to be believing that the suggestion that these models are giving are correct, while these models could be producing some really problematic output. And I think that's the main reason we need to be aware of this.
I mean, using AI, which is, again, generated emotional intelligence based on how humans think and feel, and using that as a replacement for real relationships is definitely problematic, right? Like, I mean, how do you navigate, whether you're old or new or divorced or, old or young, how do you navigate, because I see searches, again, if you use AI as essentially an elevated search function, you will see the range of questions and the kind of advice and like the essential loneliness of people and the confusion they feel about relationships. And I'm always curious to hear about how it's not just the dark depths, but the complete replacements. And we've seen this in movies, right? You've seen Her, and I think there was a movie last year in Bollywood that kind of, where a guy creates a robot and falls in love with her. And that theme is played out in many ways. But how far does this go? The romantic aspect of it, the loneliness aspect of it, that you see the potential of AI in the future.
we mentioned that, like, those examples in the book of these movies. I think it's really problematic. And so we've seen this, if social media is responsible for making people more lonely, AI is probably going to be 100 times worse, right? You imagine, I mean, the amount of positive confirmation and attention you get, that's just unhealthy. So
like big ego boost.
absolutely,
right?
but that, you know, that's going to just warp your sense of what a real relationship would look like, and that's so problematic in a society like India, where patriarchy is still a huge, huge problem. That movie you mentioned, the Bollywood movie, it had, I think, Shahid Kapoor in a lead role, and there's one dialogue in that movie that really stuck with me, where he's explaining to a friend why he cannot get over this robot that he inadvertently fell in love with, and he says that, you know, मैं कुछ भी बोलता हूँ, वैसे प्यारी सी smile देके बोलती है okay. While his friend, who's married, and he has this issue with where his wife is constantly complaining about him leaving the wet towel on the bed. The most stereotyped example, right? But that sort of drives home the point. If we are having these conversations with AI, how would that affect the expectations that men have in real life relationships with women? And I think it's definitely not looking very good. And we need to be, because these systems are also meant to, see, the companies that run these technologies, they're not for profit. They're doing a business. And their business is holding our attention, getting us to pay, subscribe for things, or show us advertisements. So it is not helpful for them if we have a brief conversation and we move on. These applications and bots are intended and created to keep us, to hold our attention and to keep us conversing. So there is really no end to it. And you know, there are people talking about how they have actually developed emotional attachment. And that's not ridiculous at all. Because when you're having these conversations, you're speaking to someone, you can't see them, but they sound exactly like your friend or your boyfriend or how you wish they sound.
Your therapist.
Absolutely, your therapist. And you know, you can't ignore these human, very anthropomorphic qualities. And it's, over time, we are just going to form an emotional attachment, which is going to be disastrous, I presume.
Or not, I guess, if you were to be an optimist and think about AI bots taking human form at some point in the future and relationships, you know, going in a completely different direction. So the future is very open. But I do want to ask you what I think, you know, is a fun bit in the book where you talk about what happens with, say Bollywood actors, you know, say a Shah Rukh Khan or an Amitabh Bachchan, you know, they're going to die one day, but, you know, you can have they can live forever. AI can and has helped, you know, the likenesses of actors and actresses and people who we want around forever. You know, that creates an interesting sort of question about, do we want our stars to live around forever and watch Shah Rukh movies decades after he's gone, or, you know, hear Amitabh Bachchan's voice say new things that he otherwise wouldn't have said, right, because he's gone? What does that mean for creativity? And is that a good thing or a bad thing in terms of just our attachment to celebrity?
Absolutely. Any Amitabh Bachchan fans in the audience? Yeah. And it is one thing we talk about is, you know, Kaun Banega Crorepati, which is a huge favorite for TV viewers around the country. There's, you know, I think at a certain time in the evening, on the weekday, if you're in a small town in India, you'll sort of, if you're passing by streets, you will hear the sound of the show from people's living rooms. And, you know, I remember there was some years back when Amitabh Bachchan was not well, and they tried getting Shah Rukh Khan to do it, and even that didn't work, which shows the level of, you know, how crucial he and his persona is to that show and what he means. For someone who has that kind of fan base, you know, I don't think it is impossible at all that even if one day he is no more, and may he have a really long and healthy life, if one day he is no more, we can easily have a digital avatar of his doing that show. And I'm sure by now he's sort of taken care of his voice and digital likeness and all of that. Possibly he's thinking about it. And that might be a really nice way to honor his legacy. But there also on the flip side, that could happen with anyone. I think a few days back, I was reading about how this new video generation tool that Google launched has encouraged a lot of people to create videos of dead celebrities like Michael Jackson, Robin Williams. And there was a bit of news from Robin Williams' daughter who was saying that it's really not fun or cool to see these really weird videos of my father. And that's not in a nice, in good taste. So I think there's a lot of possibilities, but it depends on us who are using it, how we want to, which way we want to go. And I guess to your point about creativity, right? There is so much risk of us losing our creative voice. There is this lady, a voice actor that I spoke to during the book research. I think all of you in the audience would have heard her voice. If you have ever taken an Indigo flight, the voice you hear giving you instructions, asking you to fasten your seatbelt, that's her voice. During COVID, when we were right at the peak of the pandemic, when we were making phone calls to each other, before the call connected, there was a recorded message that said something like, coronavirus pandemic se pura desh lar raha hai, where your maintains social distancing, wear masks and all of that. And you had to listen to it before the call went through. Voice of the same lady. She is a very successful, well-known voiceover artist in India, and when we spoke to her, she mentioned a story where she had a client reach out to her for doing some voiceover work, and typically she gets, when someone reaches out, they give her a sample of how, what is the music, how does she sort of need to be saying things, and usually they record this sample in their own voice on a phone or something, just for her to know what it's going to sound like. This time, the sample she got was in her own voice, and obviously she had not recorded it. And when she inquired, the producer said that, well, I had your voice from previous recordings, and I just ran it through an AI voice software to see how it would sound in your voice. So obviously, in this case, she did do the work and get paid for it, but it makes it very obvious that, this person she is no longer necessary. Anyone with a copy of her voice could be using it for eternity, making money out of it, without her even getting any money off it or even being aware of it.
We'll definitely stick to the time. I am going to open it up for questions, but obviously there are copyright, ways to copyright voices, and you've seen that with Hollywood celebrities. My last really quick question is, AI, and we're in very early stages, right? It's only going to get more integrated into our lives. How do you separate fact and fiction? I ask that as a journalist because that is an essential part of my job, right? And it's getting harder and harder for us, from deep fakes to anything that's still very early. But how do we navigate a real life through what feels like it's essentially going to be a jumble?
I think it's going to be very difficult. I worry about it myself. Typically, and a lot of technologists would say this, that humans evolve. We have obviously evolved over time, which is why we are here today. We have dealt with social media and computers and all of that. So sure, we will evolve to understand. But I think we would also, one way we would evolve is by training our minds to ask more questions, which is why one of the things with this book is we've basically, every chapter is a question, and we are asking questions rather than trying to offer answers. See, I think with any misinformation or disinformation, context is really important, right? And context is probably what you need to be paying attention to. And I tell this to my parents, who quite often will forward me things on WhatsApp. No intention of doing anyone harm, but they would just forward something, and I'd be like, that doesn't look real to me. And I guess that's what we need to be doing, is not blindly believing things, even if it is in the voice of our favorite celebrity, our beloved political leader, anyone. right? Even if it's a friend. And I think we need to have a lot more awareness around it. There are obviously checks and balances that the apps we use need to be building in. And I guess that's where sort of regulation and the government's role also comes in.
Sure. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. All right, we'll open it up for questions, and please do ask away.
It's a beautiful presentation. I just wanted to know what are the compelling reasons we are not having an international framework, a legal framework for the artificial intelligence in the form of international convention, and within the country itself to have a legislation. It's very, very important, keeping in view its impact. So how would you take this? And before you address this question, may I ask to a layman, how would you explain to him or her what is artificial intelligence? Thank you.
Thank you. I think I'll take the first question, your second question first. I think artificial intelligence is a very fluid term. I mean, today when we mention it, we are talking about ChatGPT, Meta AI, and all of it, but there's everything from facial recognition technology to the algorithms that show us content on Netflix. All of that's artificial intelligence. Essentially, anything that doesn't work today is artificial intelligence. And once it starts working, we call it by that particular technology and stop referring it as artificial intelligence. But if we consider whatever technologies come under AI today, essentially, these are machines that are being trained on huge, huge data sets. It could be pictures of our face, our writing, Anupreeta's articles, music, everything. And these machines are learning from these data sets to sound, talk, behave like humans. So when you enter a prompt into ChatGPT, Gemini, anything, it doesn't really understand what we are saying. It doesn't understand the question. What it does, it takes those words and checks against its database, and it's trying to sort of compare, do permutation combination, and figure out in all of its learning, where is it that there is those words, in what context those words come side by side. What context are those words together? And it is essentially guessing what it is that you could have meant and giving you a response. Which is why we see so much of hallucination, so much things going wrong. I think there was this report recently about Deloitte getting into trouble with the Australian government because they wrote a report and they made up a lot of facts and in there. But I think very briefly, artificial intelligence is when machines are being trained on huge data sets to produce something that a human being typically would. Very basic.
Hi. What you have been on the data set. That means the integrity of the data, the credibility of the data is very, very important. So in the Indian context, the data, we have a free data, can I use the word that we are a data free, So there is a problem, right? So the data, the integrity of the data, which is the new oil. How do you ensure the credibility of the data? So that's very, very important before the artificial intelligence acts on that data set to give you a response. Thank you.
I think we have missed the bus on that. These models have already been created. So the aim now is when we are using it. So say if you are a lawyer and you want to use AI for your legal research, the best thing would be to not use ChatGPT, but to use a legal AI research tool that has taken care of those checks and balances and has ensured that any rubbish from the internet is not a part of it. So very much garbage in, garbage out.
I think we have a question.
My question is living in the post-truth world.
Sorry, I'd like to take another question. Yeah, well, we can.
I think, yeah, I can find you afterwards.
Because I'd like to give another person a chance. Yes, please.
My
sir.
question is, living in the post-truth world, who monitors the monitors? I mean, there are the likes of Elon Musk who are trying to induce a regime change in Germany and in England. So my question is, how does one know what the truth is? You know, there's a recent kid in the United States and he wanted to commit suicide. So he went to AI and said that, you know, should I speak to my parents? And AI said no. And in a way, AI was responsible in that particular case in aiding and abetting suicide. So the point is, who monitors the monitors? Because where is the truth? Because everything, like all politicians or opinion makers do, they just want you to hear what you want to hear. And they just play with the truth. So that's where I'm concerned when it comes to my 3 beautiful, responsible children, that I try and have a conversation with them because they'll otherwise go outside and wherever they go, they leave a digital footprint. And then the beast will come and feed them in and then they start living in that echo chamber thinking that that's what the truth is. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I don't think there's an easy answer to it. It is a very, very big concern, which is why we wrote this book. And hopefully, I think all we can do is ask more questions of everything that we're doing. So if there's an app that's asking us to give our data, or say, you know, the Ghibli trend, right? That was a big thing. We were all uploading our pictures to see these really nice looking images of our friends and families. But in the process, what we did is give those companies all of our pictures of our families' children. And we have no way of knowing how that might be used. So I guess all we can do is ask more questions, and hopefully this book will help people do that.
Definitely. I think we have time for one last question. But yeah, of course. Whoever has the mic gets to speak.
I have the mic.
Just one question, since we are at a lit fest, I think this is a crucial question. How is AI going to affect literature? And you know, how can we make out whether this is an original creation or it is AI-generated literature?
Ma'am, how much is the book written in AI and how much is self-written?
We tried so much, but AI writing is horrible. So we actually, to give an example of that, and I'm very glad you asked that question, ma'am, there are a couple of stories in the book that we generated using AI, and we say that this is what we have done. The aim was to show how biased AI can be. We have this story, we asked her to create a story of a couple, a man and a woman who are in a relationship and are planning their future, you know, write a story around the conversation. And I think you should definitely read it to see what it's like. But to your point, ma'am, I do think it is going to, after a point, be very difficult to distinguish, especially as more and more of the internet or all of the content around us is written using AI. I think the difference is probably, it's going to be very difficult to tell whether someone has used or not used AI, and maybe the parameter would be, are they still saying something new? Maybe it's not going to at some point be important, like, you know, how it's no longer relevant whether someone used spell check when they wrote something or not. Maybe that's the point we are going to be at, where whether people are going to be judged by what new things they say.
Well, everyone can write a book then, but for now, enter prompt. It's available in the bookstore, so please go buy a copy.
And
Thank you.
ask more questions about AI.
And ask more questions.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I know, sir, in the back you were holding on to the mic. You can probably speak to Barsali, Bhattacharyya and Anupreeta Das offline. Thank you, Barsali, for the fascinating journey through the evolving world of artificial intelligence, a world where every prompt we enter shapes the story of tomorrow. As we reflect on how technology meets humanity,